So this video is, I call it Born in the New Age. This is my New Age creation story. You may know that as the New Age movement, that is New Age. For those too young to know what that was, the Star Wars movie and New Age bookstores are remnants of that period. It was a time in the 1950s and later where awareness of spiritual and supernatural went through a lot of change in North America and Europe. Even the rock band The Beatles was touched by it. You can look New Age movement up on Wikipedia if you like. My part looks like this. In the 1950s, my mother and father were typical Mormon LDS church people living in the greater Salt Lake City vicinity. In my opinion, Mormons are fairly typical of North American Christians, leaning into holy writings, but existing with more than just a few typical quirks here and there. But Mormons excel at towing the official line in both civil and religious idealisms. So in those years, civil society mostly trusted their institutions. But the universe is complex, and man is always fallible, and that does leave some cracks in the walls. My parents were typical for Utah, just normal people trying to figure out how to raise their 3 boys and survive. One day, in 1956, when I was nearing 3, my mother was driving upward on a hill in downtown Salt Lake City, which is very hilly near the foothills, and suddenly she sees behind the hill in front of her a UFO, downtown Salt Lake City. Science fiction is well known to my parents by then, as well as events like Area 51 in 1947, so she was not excessively traumatized by it. As she was driving up a hill, and in front of her, from behind the hill ahead, in the same fashion of the recent Independence Day UFO movie, a large craft the size of a city block rises up into the air and flies off. I never asked what shape it was. I assume it was a typical saucer shape. She was in shock, but rather super perplexed. But she was confident of what she saw. Later that morning, she related the story to my dad over the phone, and he believed her fully. So, after returning home, he brought a paper. They read the evening news, expecting someone would have made a report. But nothing was there about the incident at all. My parents did not report it to anyone at the time either. The 1950s LDS Church pretty much had nothing to fully address this. Not long after the sighting, they joined a group dedicated to investigating the paranormal in Salt Lake City. The resource available to that group were one of them available to that group were psychic mediums. The primary mode for a medium is as an oracle to pass down answers to questions on behalf of their spiritual source that they're in contact with. The best of these mediums were transcendental, going totally into a talking sleep while channeling is the term, from a higher level source. In the case of my parents, their initial questions included getting advice about finding work and financial security for their growing family, of which they seemed to be experiencing undue difficulty. So they asked, what's up? Well, they were advised to continue their efforts, but eventually they were told they would end up in Washington State, not Utah, and they would be able to participate in a thing to be known later as the New Age. And indeed, by the time I was in 2nd grade, we had moved to Olympia, Washington. There, my parents joined another parapsychology study group. Within a few years, it was well known that the northwest of the U.S. was a hotbed of New Age activity in the U.S. It is after this point in time that New Age bookstores became commonplace in the U.S., especially on the West Coast. Just before that time, flying saucer sightings were well known locally, Spiritual interest groups, UFO groups, parapsychology groups are all very active by the 1960s. Even the context and content of Star Wars in the 70s was indicative of the social changes and awareness that swept over America. The movie was very popular in the Northwest. Around 1985, while I was living in Kent, Washington, and listening to a local news TV channel, I heard them comment, "The Northwest appears to be a center for New Age activity." To my perception, by that time, the New Age had actually grown and dispersed into Canada, California, and the rest of North America. But yes, it still was a center, not just the only one by then. The group my parents joined was named Awareness, which was very apt given its mandate to expand the awareness of members to all things beyond common physical life, or commonly known physical life. As for me, as a child, I was able to tag along on adventures that were appropriate for a child of my age. I had perhaps witnessed between 20 and 30 transcendental medium sessions with at least 3 different mediums, and also other excursions into the unknown while sitting on the peripheral of what my parents were up to. The end game for my mother of all this investigation, where she tried to put it to use, other than gifting a bit of awareness to her children like me, was that she had become a spiritual healer. She had gathered into her toolbox some ability to hear her guides, to receive intuition, and to use her creative mind and a skill set called toning. Toning was an auditory and visualization process which is used to dig out emotional storages such as traumas in clients and to initiate healing. I was able to sit alongside her for some of these activities, and this helped me parse out some of what she was doing. By the time I was 12, our family had fully left the limits of the Mormon Church. By the 1990s, I would say my basic orientation to everything spiritual was in place, the basis of it. I do want to note here that all true spirituality becomes an individual effort. Groups, while great for sharing and initiating a pursuit, even New Age ones, can eventually become a limiting influence, limiting your learning more about the hidden universe. I was, and still am, a student of it all, and I admit, no master of it. I'm possibly better informed than some, with a very modest list of skills, but no matter who you are, if you are still here on the planet, you are always in lesson. This last point is informative and very humbling. I have come to realize that for you to expand your mind into stuff and do it with reasonable conscience and with a bit of non-craziness, you do kind of need your own experiences. Nothing becomes more obvious to you about the world until you have some evidences and things that makes you be aware of what might be true and what is true than your own experiences. These spiritual experiences aren't really something that you can prove to somebody else unless they're able to, have mass science application to it, which just generally does not happen for most of it. Many, many people have experiences, but generally they can't really use them to prove to you anything. You really got to go off and get your own. And that's what this series of videos is about how I got some of mine and what I've learned from it. But like I say, I'm just a student. You can't end with what I say. You got to go out and get your own. Otherwise, it just pretty well means nothing to you. Thanks for listening.